My guest this hour, David Bornstein, has, full disclosure, become one of my closest friends in recent years. He is also one of the people whose perspective I have turned to with urgency and gratitude again and again as I've made sense of the very story of our time and how that is coming to us and being powerfully shaped through media and journalism, the field in which both David and I were formed. The theory of change of journalism as it came out of the 20th century, as David says, is that shining a light on what is going wrong, what is dangerous and dysfunctional, catastrophic or corrupt, will mobilize and lead us to correct it. But in a 24/7 news cycle and a fractured society, this emphasis on the terrible and the frightening, from whichever side of our cultural trenches you inhabit, has fueled a paralyzing, dehumanizing fearfulness and the collapse of trust in institutions and in each other. Many of us are turning away from the news altogether. Is that the answer? How to live in this world with this media and retain meaningful, reasonable hope and agency. And what are we not seeing and hearing that we could orient towards? There is no one wiser on these questions than David, and I trust that you will find this conversation to be distinctively helpful and calming. I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. David Bornstein is co-founder and CEO of the globally esteemed Solutions Journalism Network. I spoke with him before a small group of citizens in Minneapolis. David, I might just start with asking you, the why of you entering journalism, what that word meant to you, what you wanted it to mean, the reverence for the field you entered, because you are a mission-saturated person. And you and I have spoken about this as much as we can point to what distresses us about the field and its effect on society. We know that most people who go into journalism go into it because they want to be touching the world in a positive way.
Yeah. It's, my first career before journalism was I was a computer programmer. I was sitting in a cubicle for 4 years writing code. And so I thought, well, I'll take a year off and backpack around the world. And, I was 23 and really just see the world and maybe go back to something after that. I wasn't sure. And it was really that year where, I got to live a year in questions. You're just meeting people every day. You're seeing people. You're learning about the world. My curiosity became the most, sort of dominant sort of quality of that year. And I came away from that trip and I thought, how do you live a life with that level of aliveness? And so I became interested in sociology, anthropology, and journalism as sort of three fields where you're sort of driven by questions about people. And it was, I got a good opportunity in New York to go to NYU and study journalism. So that was how it began. But it's always really been about getting to know the world. And really it's not just getting to know the world, it's like I think of the world today as a kind of, we're becoming one organism in a very real way. And the most of the brain is connective tissue. Like the connective tissue in the world is the media. It's the way we work as an organism or fail to work as an organism. And media is it means what's our relationship to what we know and what's out there that's beyond our direct experience. It's mediated by this stuff. And so I feel like more than ever, the question of getting the connective tissue right becomes this, not only a survival imperative, but a joy imperative too. Like, can we have fun with this organism?
And one of the ideas of yours that I quote endlessly, just about everybody who knows me at some point knows that I've said, my friend David Bornstein talks about the theory of change of journalism. And I've been thinking about that so much in the context of the fracture in our country and political realities around the world. And also just how overwhelming it is to be alive altogether right now, and how journalism, how this theory of change on steroids is really wreaking havoc amidst havoc that is already present. So I'd love for you to describe this. And when did you start? It's one of these things where you say it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's it, right? You're naming something that I've experienced and it makes perfect sense. But when did you put those words around it? This is the theory of change of journalism as it's practiced, as it came down to us in the 20th century being practiced.
I mean, it's kind of funny. So when we started Solutions Journalism Network, like as a nonprofit, some of your funders will say, like, what's your theory of change? And you have to make an argument and make a case to get the grant. And it became clear it was really a hard sell, because it was sort of like the world will get better or our community will get better when we show people how awful everything is. Right? It's like my children, will get better if I point out their deficiencies at breakfast every morning. I mean, just like wrong about human behavior. And then, of course, as you said, if you draw that out to, we have this feedback system that is constantly alerting us to the problems and the deficiencies and the pathologies. It's getting faster and faster and faster. It's on our phones. It's updated every 2 minutes. It's global. Then you start having like people taking out the batteries of the smoke detector because it beeps all the time, every time we cook. Right. And then people saying like, my nervous system is overwhelmed. I have to unplug. I need an air gap between media and me, because it's like the human nervous system becomes the limit. And the media is like a Ferrari and the human nervous system is like a dirt track. And they're meeting and it's, you're the one who first said to me, like, I think the global human body is dysregulated.
Yeah, I think our nervous system at a species level is dysregulated.
Yeah, and so all that. So you look at that and you think of like, just after the election, when I was just speaking to a bunch of friends, they all just couldn't bear to pay attention to the news. I'm taking like a news break for. Some of them haven't gone back yet. The people who are just in kind of a grieving period, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. So you have this intensity, and then of course there's the idea that the information you're getting, if you continue to amp up, and we actually did we asked a researcher to look at the behavioral science on what happens to people when you continually feed their sense of fear and anxiety and threat, but you don't feed their sense of agency or capacity to deal with those threats. What actually happens? And it's very predictable. People will deny the message, they'll blame the messenger, they will tune out and disengage from the message. You see news avoidance on the rise, you see all of the things that you're seeing. So none of the things that you would want to do with journalism can even work in that model anymore. You just, we're seeing this now. That's why, people say I don't trust the media, but in some ways it's much deeper than just trust. I can't work with this system.
I remember you telling me a story about how you'll go into newsrooms and you'll present, some place where there's a problem or a crisis or a challenge, and you'll say, this community creatively worked with this. And I think you're also struggling with the words, solving and fixing at this point, but, that this is a success story. This is a story of generativity and resilience and forward and living forward. And then here's a community that made a mess of it, and there was corruption and catastrophe. And then you'll say, which is the story you'd report on?
Yeah.
Which is the story?
We made it really, really simple.
Okay.
We said there's a school in this community that used to have a graduation rate of 85%, but that graduation rate has plummeted to 50%. There's a school in the community across the river that used to have a graduation rate of 50%, but now the graduation rate is up to 85%. Which one's the story? And overwhelmingly, journalists would say the first one was the story, because this is a story where you have to, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Our job is to protect society by being watchdogs, the whole theory of change. The other story, well, why is that not also a story? Right. That's a story, presumably, the knowledge about how to improve graduation rates is all in the second story. The knowledge about what not to do or how to muck it up is in the first story, or how to be negligent. The then there was kind of like, well, there was like a hemming and hawing, like maybe you're right, but our job is not to advocate for anything.
Right.
Our job is not to burnish people's reputations.
Yeah.
So we have to leave that out. And what you're basically saying is you can diagnose a problem, but you can't talk about treatment options. So if you are a doctor, no one wants to go to you, right? Because we all want to know our treatment options when we go to the doctor. Mm-hmm. The diagnosis is really important, but we go once for the diagnosis. We go again and again to try to understand the nuances of what we could do about it. And journalism had in some ways, because it was so concerned with not being an advocate, not picking winners, not saying this is the way to do it, that basically said, I can't touch these stories because of my professional ethics.
Right.
And now, which is fascinating, because if you boil down and you say, what's your core commitment? What's the core commitment? It's to help and protect. That's really, so you're now saying, in order to help and protect, I cannot surface knowledge that is helpful.
Yeah.
And people don't even realize they're making this. Once it's pointed out, actually, people are like, that's a bit crazy, isn't it? Can we work around that? And that's obviously what the whole work is about, you know?
I think I've told you the story of talking to somebody who's at Diane Winston, who works at UCLA at the Knight Center, and she was talking to some journalists about, I haven't heard people talking about this, but there was a moment where there was this idea of social justice journalism or something like that. And then journalists, established journalists said, we that's advocacy. We can't do advocacy. And she said, so when you only report on violence and corruption, are you advocating for violence and corruption? There's something in this that it's just like these instincts that are ingrained that have not been reflected on.
Yeah. And there, there's a status, that's what the Pulitzers go for. They go for investigations. It's in the phrases, sunlight is the best disinfectant, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. There's all this language in journalism that this is our job. And there have been experiments like public journalism and things like that, citizen journalism, that over the years have not been that successful.
Yeah.
And often didn't get the clicks, or before it was even clicks, didn't get the engagement around it. So people believe that the public really just doesn't want this kind of information. They want, if it bleeds, it leads kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it turns out that there's so much more when you begin to explore what it is to actually do journalism that examines and explores ways of responding to problems. Mm-hmm. There's ways of making it, we've worked with thousands of journalists now. You can make it really compelling and radically helpful to people. And, we can talk about how this would relate to democracy and things like that, too, because it's a big...
Yeah, you've convinced me, because that's the other thing. When I have this conversation with people, they say, yeah, but, what if it bleeds, it leads, which is another thing we just all believe.
That is like a telegraph-era insight. It literally was, when you go back to the penny presses, like 100 years ago, when they had to sell all of these newspapers. And even before, more than 100 years ago, it was a telegraph when you could get news about, salacious news like, a murder that occurred in another state. You could put that in your paper because you could get it through the telegraph. And it was a way of selling lots and lots of newspapers at a penny each to pay for these huge presses a century ago. Everything is different today in the world, including the fact that our phones are updated every 5 seconds. That if it bleeds, it leads today with the technology, then you just gut the human spirit. You can't work with that, with the frequency that we have media at this point.
Yeah, and as you say, there are ways to be creative. This was something that was really on my mind when I started my show. That. I felt like traditional journalism is about exposing evil, as you say, in order to, with this theory of change, that will animate the good to rise up. But I used to think about what would it mean to expose goodness? And I think that means really drawing out the drama of good lives, right? It's not, because often what journalism does when it talks about a good person is it calls them a hero and puts them on a pedestal and writes a fluffy feel-good piece that is really pretty boring and also in its way not motivating because it kind of presents this as this kind of heroic figure and none of us could really be like that. And I think for me, like a kind of animating question was, how to make goodness as riveting as evil, because evil and dysfunction and disaster and danger, like our bodies are attuned to be on the lookout for those things and to get on the alert and respond to them. So there's more work that has to go. There's more intelligence that has to go into making our higher capacities as interesting as they actually are.
And you can still work with the biology. I mean, we are totally attuned to information that's threatening. The rattlesnake. I mean, we're wired to pay attention to that. We're also wired to love puzzles. I mean, look at the New York Times. I mean, its whole business model is around puzzles, right?
Right.
I mean, Sudoku, the most popular TV shows for years were all of these TV procedurals, Law and Order, CSI. They're all basically detective stories. The most common literary genre in the world is the detective story. Every culture has them. They're basically whodunits. And so we co-opted the whodunit and we said, what if journalism developed a model called a howdunit, which is a story that's not about goodness. It's not driven by worthiness. It's actually driven by curiosity, by a desire to understand how are they going to crack the case? How are they going to catch the bad guys or save the baby? If the TV show House was a model, that's, you introduce a problem and then you're there for the whole hour to try to figure out how it's going to be solved. And so you can apply that to how did this community do this remarkable thing to reduce homelessness? Or how did this community do this remarkable thing to improve the high school? How did this school actually increase the high school graduation rate when all the other schools with similar resources haven't been able to figure that one out? So you get this really interesting puzzle, and if you're a good storyteller, like a good detective story is all about withholding information and sort of bringing people along in a way that they want to know. How's Harry finally going to get Voldemort? I mean, 4,000 pages read out loud, right?
Right.
And each chapter, by the way, is how's Harry going to get out of this mess? How's Hermione going to get out of this mess? I mean, there's a mini howdunit narrative that runs through a lot of these series. And I do think that curiosity is the only thing that's biologically as strong as threat. Goodness is not a thing. And that's why I think some of these public journalism, civic journalism things didn't do that well.
Yeah.
Because they were sort of like broccoli kind of things.
Yeah, they're eat your spinach. Yeah. So the thing I've been thinking about most from conversations I've had with you this week and last week. What week is it? Was the election last week? Yes. It feels like it was. Where are we? Yeah, we're in the following week. And I'll just say, I think I hate being in rooms where there's an assumption that everyone voted the same way or thinks the same way, and I don't function in that way. And my personal approach to all of this has been to be present to the fact that our country is fractured, and it was going to be just as fractured, if not more fractured, the day after the election, whoever won. And that's what I want to tend to, and I think that's what you want to tend to. So that's the spirit in which we speak of the election, or just what we're interested in is the health of our country. And one of the recent times that you and I were talking, you said to me, and tell me if this is right, that you can draw a direct line and maybe I'm making this, maybe this is like what I want to remember, but a direct line from like the advent of, investigative journalists being sex symbols, right? Woodward and Bernstein, like Watergate, which journalists think of as like the high watermark of our profession. And somehow, those Pulitzers are always going to people who are jumping in to be new Woodward and Bernsteins for the most part. But that what that did is it put this investigative, let's shine a light in a really exciting way on what is broken on steroids. So even kind of accelerated or deepened this theory of change. And you said to me many times, and that there's so much, in federal agencies and in government and in institutions that is actually keeping us safe, that is really boring and intricate and quiet and behind the scenes and good, right? But this drumbeat for decades of what is broken, corrupt, what you cannot trust. And so you saying to me that journalism, unwittingly, not meaning to be this, has been a huge force in the fact that so many people in our country look at, the government in general as something that is beyond repair. And why not break it some more because it's all bad?
Yeah, if someone's elected who basically says, I'm going to bring a sledgehammer to the institutions, well, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
If you have that belief. So, and the stuff that we were talking about earlier, the post-Watergate and the Pentagon Papers is really when journalism made this huge break into what became the hyper-cynicism of the last, really since the early 70s. For good reasons. I mean, because they'd been taken in big time, especially by the Vietnam War. And, this we won't get fooled again kind of thing. But what you have is a generation after that of people always looking for the spin, always looking for where is the government, where are people betraying the public trust? And then you have the General Social Survey, which has been looking at trust and confidence in institutions pretty much since that time, seeing this steady erosion of trust and confidence in every branch of government, but also a lot of other public institutions as well. And so to this day, like if you want to make an argument of, here's a bunch of things that government's really doing well in your town. Or I'll give a specific example. Many of you may remember during the when Rick Perry was running many years ago, and he said he was going to eliminate. He couldn't remember, but he was going to eliminate one department. It was the Department of Energy, in one of the debates. And what was interesting is that nobody thought to ask him, if you eliminate this $30 billion federal agency, which spends $15 billion, half of its budget, protecting Americans from radiation and limiting the spread of nuclear weapons, what are you going to do to protect Americans without this agency? Like, no one even had the thought that we should ask that question. And I would venture to say probably because the people doing the interviewing themselves don't know anything about the government and don't have much of appreciation of the government themselves. So you have this sort of indifferent, the business magazines are called Success, Money, Fortune, Fast Company. This notion that there's an entire journalistic apparatus to talk about how great business is. And when Donald Trump comes down the escalator in 2015 and says, I'm a businessman, I'll fix everything, he's working from a narrative that journalism created.
Right. Right.
And that the government can't do anything well, and we need to drain the swamp and all these things, is also a narrative that journalism has co-authored. And journalists really don't feel comfortable reporting on when the government's effective.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's pretty hard to make an argument that maybe you should pay taxes and maybe we should pay more taxes in some cases if there's no sense that these institutions do anything well. There's this an awards in Washington called the Sammys. Has anyone ever heard of the Sammys? So it's the public service awards given by the Partnership for Public Service. And you hear these extraordinary stories of people working in the federal government who've done the most remarkable things to protect people with no fanfare, making no money, or not much money. And journalists never go to it. People dress up in their tuxedos and their evening gowns to win these awards. And there's like 3 journalists there,
right,
compared to like the Met Gala or something like that.
Oh gosh, that's such an interesting connection to make. I've said to you that I think the business section of the New York Times has become the most interesting section and kind of like a model for what journalism could be, because it's good news stories and it's bad news stories. And it's like, in business, they do investigative journalism about what went right, what this person did to build this up. in a way that we don't do with our institutions that keep us safe. And
this is the thing that really, you can't hold institutions accountable for poor performance unless you can show that better performance is possible or is happening. Yeah. Once you show this is what good performance looks like, this is what exceptional performance looks like, then you can do an investigation and say, this is unacceptable. This is inexcusable. Look what this city has done. Look what this agency has done. Look what this agency has.
Right.
You actually bring more pressure to bear. You're more protective of the public when you're able to benchmark better performance. You can create competitive pressures. You take away people's excuses. And so not covering, not doing the solutions-oriented coverage actually lets people off the hook.
It's kind of interesting because that logic that you just used is actually familiar to us from taking business seriously.
Right.
Right? But
Yeah.
it's not usually the way we talk about taking politics seriously or government service.
Yeah. So there's so much upside in doing that.
Well, you sent me a bunch of notes today, which is kind of a blessing and a curse because I didn't really have time to do the notes I would have done if I had the time. But there was a line in there about, something you observe of our society, which I think speaks to where we are now, and it's what we're saying. I just want to read it because it's so simple and so profound. You said, that part of what we're dealing with is a deep taking for granted of many things that function. Not only do we take our institutions for granted, but we have contempt for them without really knowing what they actually do. And that matter of just, if journalism is telling the story of our time, if it is helping us be informed about how to live in this world, that knowing what they actually do would be part of it, right? It seems so logical when you spell it out.
Yeah, you can do it. We can undo it. There's so much contempt in the whole society. In addition to contempt for the government institutions, by revealing the human beings in them. And, one of the stories, one of the Sammys Award winners this year was a guy who had spent many, many years figuring out how to make sure that coal mines don't collapse on coal miners. Something like 50,000 coal miners, I believe, in the 20th century were killed because of coal mines that collapsed. I think 2016 was the first year that a week went by when no coal mine collapsed. It was because of this man, I think his name is, if I can remember, Chris Mark. And Michael Lewis wrote a 12,000-word profile of him under the title The Canary. It's probably estimated that his work has saved a few thousand, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people. They don't know for sure. But, he got up and he took his award and he went to the coal miners and he just walked off the stage. He was like, why are you giving this to me? I'm just doing my job, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of people you have. You have people doing that. And, I asked Michael Lewis, because I saw him at this event, and I said, what happened after that story came out? He said, people in West Virginia made a song about Chris Mark. So this is an incredibly, if you want to talk about healing the country, you have a government employee doing something that's directly protective of a group of people who feel totally unseen, and unvalued by the government. You tell that story. That story can be told a lot. There's lots of examples of it. That's a very, very compelling one. That would do a lot to heal where we're at right now, right? That kind of story. And then you can do it for the people too, like who we are, because we have so much contempt for each other in the way. There's such an opportunity now, not just to reduce the contempt, but if you're a community today, and you're like the local news organization, and your community went like 52-48, let's say, for Trump. So you have, 48% of the people in your community who are, many of them will be in fear right now, feeling real grief, maybe in kind of mourning state, depending on how they're taking it. That's that's an opportunity to actually ask people, like, how are we going to take care of our neighbors who are feeling so bad? How are we going to take care of our children or our parents or our grandparents who are really, really feeling this incredible heaviness now? How do we as a community talk about this? If we talk about it as, like, if I knew someone was in grief that I cared about, if they voted differently or whatever, my instinct would be to bring a compassionate concern to them, right? Why don't we don't have a journalistic language that taps into any of that, you know?
No, and we certainly didn't have a journalistic language for that 4 years ago when the 52% was for Joe Biden and the 48% was for Donald Trump.
Exactly, same
I mean,
thing.
I hear progressives interested in that now.
Right.
Something you
100.
said to me the other day. So this whole interview is things you've already said to me. Something you said to me the other day is the same people who, will quote Brian Stevenson with his beautiful line, which we all know is true in our bodies, that none of us is merely the worst thing we've ever done, right? And he's talking about people on death row. But so in the context of criminal justice, progressives will quote that and quote that and quote that. But in our political life together, we are so often on every side reducing other human beings and entire swaths of other human beings to who they voted for, as though that really tells you much at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So much opportunity to get to know each other through storytelling. And that's, I think, if there is a road that runs to a better, to something better on the other side of this, it is getting back into relationship with each other. And this goes back to, I remember writing a story about, going back to George W. Bush and how all the Thanksgiving dinners across America were horrible because of that election. And I remember there was this organization I did an article on. It was called Ask Big Questions. Just wonderful model of how do you ask the kind of question that helps people understand one another. And one of the questions they would encourage people to ask is, for whom do you feel responsible? And so she asked that question at her Thanksgiving dinner, and she came to understand how her father had voted in answering that question, why he had voted the way he did. It was very personal, and her heart opened to him in a way that had been very hard for her because of her politics. It was a beautiful example of how through inquiry, through a journalistic kind of inquiry, you can see people with greater complexity. You don't flatten them down to that one thing, and we can come back into relationship in all sorts of ways. And I do think that part of what journalists get wrong is they're not getting to that complexity often enough. But often they're not going to the place. They're only going to the place to try to figure out how they voted every 4 years, and then they don't visit in between. There's also just a kind of indifference to people's kind of lived experience that's part of it's not something extreme happening kind of thinking. So this notion of the, who people are is something that you have to be there a little bit more often to really get that in a true way. And if you have a relationship with people, if you can develop that, you can be able to hold the harder conflict that this election represents for a lot of people. You can hold that in that relationship still.
Yeah, and not resolve it, but hold it, live with it, and live with it in a way that it doesn't have to define how you're going to be in relationship forever. Live with it in a way that there are possibilities for growth.
Yeah,
go on.
Courtney, our common friend Courtney Martin, used to have on her email, she used to have a quote. It was something to the effect of, there is nobody you couldn't love if you knew their whole story.
Yeah.
Right? So if you really understood how they came to that point of view, that position or whatever, and the different, the path, the life that they had walked. And that's, in some ways, that's what we need to be able to make that more visible. I was
really a seedbed for my work was at St. John's Abbey up in Collegeville in the middle of Minnesota. And those Benedictines who pride themselves as a community on predating all the divisions of the church, not just Protestant Catholic, but East-West. They also were really important in bringing different kinds of Christians together in the mid-20th century, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was absolutely revolutionary at the time. And, different kinds of Christians had been killing each other for hundreds of years before that. And I learned through them to pick up a great big question. Up there, it would usually be a theological question. But people who, yes, were all Christian, but could not be more different, Nazarene holiness over here and Armenian Orthodox over there. And everybody had to start by answering the question through the story of your life. And actually, that did not make it merely personal. It grounded everything in the full humanity of everyone. And so as you got to the big ideas and the intellectual complexity, it was all, and difference, it was still all humanized. And dogma was humanized. And I remember feeling after the 2016 election, if today, if every American who could just sit next to somebody who voted the other way and ask the question, how did you vote? Answer the question through the story of your life, that might have just calmed us down.
Yeah, there's so... we talked a little bit about the story of what's really happening in the country, the extraordinary inequality, and how much more extreme it is than people even understand, as a way of understanding perhaps the result. Like that, the paths that people have walked, that we haven't seen each other.
That we haven't seen each other.
Yeah.
It was an interesting quote that you sent me today from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that she had, in a spirit of real curiosity and searching, asked people in her district where there was a big increase in people who voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Why? And people came back and said that they felt seen and heard and taken seriously.
Yeah, seen, valued, and understood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to turn away from the journalistic, and also, I think this focus on dysfunction and danger, it's there in all of our most sophisticated disciplines, right? It's there in the academy. It's there in journalism. It's not just a journalistic problem. It's actually a human phenomenon. And we're not self-aware about it, and we think we're being smarter when we just when we're critical. But in fact, we're hardwired to be critical, and we actually have to take a little effort. And it's spiritual work, in a sense, muscular spiritual work, to orient actively, proactively, towards what might be good for us. And so I hear you these days talking a lot about, when you're talking about what is the turn we make, you're talking about how you're being influenced by this notion of right speech, which is a Buddhist notion. It's spiritual discipline. And principles of right speech are that and that these could be, guidelines for North Stars for journalism true, that something is true, helpful, proportionate, not harmful, not aggressive, humble, calming. All of that also is about how words and ideas and information are going to land in human bodies and psyches. So it's also about not just what you have to say, but saying it in a way which is a skill that we cultivate in our lives of love, where we all don't always agree with the people we love, to speak in order to be heard, and not just to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, which is what social media has also encouraged us to do. So would you talk about, this way forward, and I think when you talk about right speech, you really are also including some of your really wonderful, wise ideas about this, about how journalism as we've been doing it isn't wise about reaching into the hearts and minds of people, but how that might happen.
I mean, so many, we've worked with so many news organizations around the country, and so often what we've heard from audiences is something to the effect of, I don't care what you know until I know that you care. I trust you if I feel you have my back, is essentially the message. So journalists tend to think that you trust me because I fact check. But people are telling us, no, I trust because I feel like you care about me and you have my interest at heart. And so how do you show people that you care? Well, you really try to genuinely be helpful to them. You try to really understand what their problem is, what they're suffering from, what they're scared about, and you come with something that can be helpful. So the first two of right speech are true. And if we just stopped there and we didn't go any further, I think it would be a huge thing, because then you would, if you had a journalism that said, our job is to be true, which everyone already agrees, but also to be helpful, then you would have to make the case on a sort of story-by-story basis. Well, what's the case that this story will be helpful? Are you giving people that another thing that's yet going to overwhelm them while they're already overwhelmed? I mean, have you told them it's really, really, really bad about the climate crisis, and now you're going to add another really to that today? It's even worse than we said yesterday, kind of thing. That's not helpful. That's just not, that's unkind, actually. So, well, there's different ways that you could be helpful. You can be helpful by helping people understand their options that they're not aware of, understanding a threat. You can help them understand why something is happening, like why this election is happening, in a way that doesn't do what happened, like in the last round of this, where we didn't seem to really understand why it happened, right? Yeah. So the journalism sort of missed that. But then you sort of get into these other nuances of, like, a lot of journalists would probably say, my job is not to calm people. To speak in a calming way.
They would absolutely say that.
Yeah,
they would say, it's not my job.
It's not my job.
Yeah.
So then you get into kind of like, you see what's happening in medicine, like where doctors, oncologists, for example, will walk around with a 20-inch stool, place it at the bedside, sit down, and not talk to the patient until they're eye to eye at the same level, because there's all this research that shows that when you're talking about very difficult subjects to people, you have to understand the behavioral dynamics there. Mm-hmm. Meeting people, not standing above them when you're talking to them and all that, meeting them at eye level and all that. They're much more able to take in the information. They'll feel calmer in hearing that information when they're... So then there's a kind of... there's a kind of an understanding of there's a giver of information and there's a receiver, and communication has to work, has to really respect the biology.
It has to work. It has to be communication.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can, and then you would get into like, well, how should we give our community this message? Mm-hmm. It's, we're so good at this face to face. That's the thing. Like we're so wired by evolution, to be able to do this when we're with each other in sort of normal settings. But then when we use these media tools, it's like we forget that this is going to land really heavily on people who are already really, really anxious about a million other things, Mm-hmm. And there's a kind of, it's like, it's an externality. It's something that the journalists are causing, but they're not really taking responsibility for. Mm-hmm. How is this going to land on my community when we put out this story and stuff like that? And so that at a point where like the whole country pretty much, I mean, it doesn't matter what your politics are, basically says, I can't trust mainstream news. It's not giving me helpful information. I mean, that's the thing we're hearing from a lot of people now, is like, so there's a really big opportunity to rebuild trust. And so you do that by showing you care, and you show your care by being genuinely helpful to people, and then you bring in all these things. Mm-hmm. And I just think that it's actually really obvious, and it's really doable.
And as you say, it's happening.
Start this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
And it's happening in other fields, as you say. It's happening in medicine. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics as a social psychologist for behavioral economics, saying something about human economic behavior, which journalists could just wholesale take in, that none of us is rational. And facts alone, I think a lot about facts alone are not sufficient to have truth felt in a human body. That's right? Facts alone, and there's a lot of truth that facts alone cannot convey. But there is this faith in facts that actually is irrational. It's so interesting, right?
Yeah, and you can think about what are the delivery systems. Should we have a retail shop where people can come in and we have conversations with people? I mean, what are all the different ways that journalism can be delivered? You know, I was on a WhatsApp group that was having a bunch of very, very difficult conversations about many global issues. And there was one guy who just posted, he said, I'm just going to do this in a video because I think if I write it, people won't understand it. And he posted this very heartfelt 2-minute explanation of his position. And it was so effective because you could see that he was really trying to appeal to people's humanity. And it was like 2 a.m. and his hair was disheveled. And you could feel like, wow, this is a really good person trying to communicate something from their heart.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with them or not, that you have a human response to that. And so the delivery channels of the, social media, and I mean, it's so not using any of the human strengths. That's the problem.
David, you wrote that there might be a journalistic Hippocratic oath. That would be another way to think about how to move forward differently. If journalists kind of had to take an oath to do no harm, what would that mean? And I'm just going to read this list. Don't make people excessively fearful. Don't make fun of people. Don't look down on them. Don't tell people about threats and then leave them hanging without a sense of what can be done. Don't flatten people into stereotypes. Make people curious. Feed humility. Help them see that there are things that don't fit their narratives, both about themselves and about others. Show the humanity, the complexity in others, especially in the other. Be radically helpful. Show you care by being helpful. Show people that we have their backs. Don't overwhelm people with too much information they can't take in or do anything about. It's unkind. Listen deeply and respectfully. Stop condescending. Don't make people look foolish. Don't only come around when you want to show what's wrong with a place. These are also just ways to live.
Yeah.
You want to say that you have a last word?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is going to happen. I mean, that's the combination of things, the loneliness in the society that Vivek Murthy has talked about. The communities where neighbors won't share lawnmowers with each other. I mean, so many things are happening that people just don't want to happen because of this situation and because of the way we are talking about each other. And one very good thing is that a lot of the news organizations that don't have a Hippocratic Oath, which are, going out of business. There's a lot of this business model is collapsing because people are rejecting the product. People it's if it was a restaurant, people walk in and they say, I don't really want to go to your restaurant anymore because whenever I eat your food, I feel sick. So the forcing people to cook better is going to happen for normal human forces. And I think the message is that there is a much more heartful way we can do this stuff. We can do journalism and we can do communication in general, and I think it's very much wanted. It's not an uphill. And so each example, talk about it as much as possible, point to as many things as possible, and that's how I think it will continue to spread.
I think, at risk of going over time, I feel like someone would say, well, when I toggle to Fox News, are they following some of these principles? I mean, that's a place that grows, right? That is big. Are they not leaving people hanging without a sense of what can be done? What is the intelligence the human intelligence that is manifest in the success of that.
There's always going to be conflict entrepreneurs. They are always going to be business models for what Fox News does. The conflict entrepreneurs will always want to be putting logs on the fire of conflict, of resentment, because they basically turn people's hurt and resentment and sense of failure and shame and feeling that they're condescended to and not seen, valued, and understood. As AOC said, they turn that into money.
Well, it's a way of taking pain and fear seriously, right? They're being present to it.
Yes, they're being present to it.
It's not being ignored. It's not being unseen.
Yeah, so I think that is going to continue to exist, but it doesn't benefit the people who visit it. It's not nourishing. It's food that if you eat a lot of it, you don't feel good. I mean, we know this from research. People who watch Fox News feel more afraid about the world, right? It drives up a lot of negative things that people actually don't necessarily want to feel. But it is serving a need. And I think that stat that we mentioned, between sort of 2000 and 2020, the economic output of the U.S. went from being roughly 50-50 between red and blue counties to 71-29 from blue and red counties. So you have this enormous, in 20 years, this enormous inequality opening up. A 4-year life expectancy between blue and red states. 9-year life expectancy, David Brooks reported, between men who...
A difference, right?
9-year difference in life.
People live less long.
Yeah, 4-year difference in life expectancy between red and blue states, and a 9-year difference in life expectancy between, I think it was men whose maximum education is high school and others. Real pain and suffering. Real sense of, this country is not working for me, and no one seems to be doing anything about it. And that's been going on for a long time. It's like a quarter century. So this is not just this last election, and it preceded that too. So I think, the context for Fox News has to be understood in that context. I don't think Fox News is as successful in a different context.
Mm-hmm. So be nourishing. It holds your counsel.
Be nourishing. For our work now, I'm looking at what are the institutions that are leveling? If the fundamental problem, I think, is this profound inequality that has grown in this country, I would say, what are the leveling institutions? What are the stories, the things to focus on that every day bring us a little bit closer to everyone feels seen, valued, and understood?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
David Bornstein is co-founder and CEO of the Solutions Journalism Network. Learn more about their work with news organizations around the world and find their Solutions Story Tracker at solutionsjournalism.org. He has been a journalist focusing primarily on social innovation for 3 decades. From 2010 to 2021, he co-authored the Fixes column in the New York Times. He's the author of several books, including The Price of a Dream, The Story of the Grameen Bank, and How to Change the World, Social Entrepreneurs and the Power of New Ideas. Special thanks this week to Dana Mortensen, founder of World Savvy, who pulled this event together. This episode was produced by Chris Heagle, Zach Rose, Julie Seipel, Kayla Edwards, Tiffany Champion, Carla Zanoni, and Andrea Prevost. Our funding partners include the Hearthland Foundation, helping to build a more just, equitable, and connected America, one creative act at a time. The Fetzer Institute, supporting a movement of organizations that are applying spiritual solutions to society's toughest problems. Find them at fetzer.org. Calliopeia Foundation, dedicated to cultivating the connections between ecology, culture, and spirituality, supporting initiatives and organizations that uphold sacred relationships with the living earth. Learn more at calliopeia.org. And the Osprey Foundation, a catalyst for empowered, healthy, and fulfilled lives. On Being is an independent production of the On Being Project based in Minnesota and New York City.